The opinions expressed in this show belong to the person expressing them. They do not purport to reflect the opinions or views of Rancher or any other entity.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Coffee and Cloud Native. Arr. My name is Adrian Goins, and I am fired up to be here with you today. The purpose of this show is to share with you news and interesting content related to Kubernetes and Cloud Native, and to build a community of people who are interested in using technology to live a better life. Do I talk really fast? I'm not aware that I'm talking really fast, but somebody watched the show and asked me if I had recorded it sped up and then uploaded it to YouTube. I don't know. Do I talk too fast? Maybe. But there's a lot of information to cover. If you're watching live, consider following or subscribing to the channel. And if you're watching a replay, well, please give the video a thumbs up so the YouTube algorithm shares it with other people. Join the free community site and the Discord server. Links to that are scrolling across the bottom of the screen. They're also in the video description. Live chat happens in Discord with a bot that relays between YouTube and Twitch. But just come hang out with us, either during the show or after. And as you'll see in a moment, the chat is where the real action happens. We have tons of people in the chat today. The chat was actually blowing up even before the whole show started. So just real quick, let's say hello to... Oh my gosh, I have to scroll back so far. So many people. All right. Good morning, Ian, WifeBot, RestreamBot, hey, Mac, hello. Hey, I'm in the chat. Look at that. Am I allowed to say hi to myself? Chrysalis. Apparently I am, because later on somebody posts me up in stereo, which is pretty funny. WifeBot Clint. I don't know if I already said WifeBot. There's a point where the scrolling happens and then it's Peter Keach, good morning. Frank, Mo Grady. And then I know that there are many of you who are also watching on YouTube and Twitch, so good morning to all of you as well. Thank you all for joining. Alex Dorr, Duck, hey. All right, that's all the scrolling I got time for today. So real quick. We had another one of those Chilean earthquakes, which actually happen all the time, but for some reason recently, whenever there's an earthquake above about a magnitude of 6, it breaks the internet. So if the internet's broken, it's not my fault. It just means that just watch the replay later, because I record all this and then I upload it afterwards. I don't know why it happens. Maybe they have like a fiber optic cable stretched really tight, or maybe they don't have their routers screwed into the cabinet and they fall out. I have no idea. Last time it took about 2 weeks for it to get better. It may come up later in the show, but because Trufflebot randomly selects things from the pool of available stuff, in case it doesn't, I want to specifically give a shout out to Nirmata and congratulations for Kyverno being accepted into the CNCF as a sandbox project. We've had Kyverno on the show a lot. They're a policy implementation system for Kubernetes. Very cool. We actually have one of the people from Kyverno in the community. I'm not going to out him, but you know, I just wanted to say, hey, cool, congrats, way to go. And now let's move on to the actual content that we have for today. Release recap is just stuff that didn't make it into tool of the day and may not before something else does. So I just want to call these out on a weekly basis in case there's anything that was interesting. FactorDB had an update last week. Factor is used by Puppet for facts around operating systems. So they had an update and now they have more facts. If you're not familiar with them, they have a lot of information about a lot of different OSs, as you see scrolling across the screen here. So you can also use them outside of Puppet. Anyway, that had an update. The other one, which was a tool of the day contender that didn't make it on because of timing, is Kpack from Pivotal. Kpack is another build system for Kubernetes. So you can actually use this to run builds in Kubernetes. I don't know why it needs really more information than that. They had an update last week as well. And we've had other stuff on here. We had Kaneko, and there's other things that do container builds inside of your cluster. Kpack hasn't come up before. There you go. They had an update. Now let's get to the meat of the show, right? The collector bots gathered candidates for the show, and Trufflebot has scored them from 1 to 5 coffees, corresponding to a 75% to 100% probability of being interesting content. He'll post them one at a time into the A/B test channel on Discord. I'll load them up here, and we'll talk about them. Anyone watching live can rate them, and the final scores are shown when we move to the next item. Let me get that scrolling Giphy thing off the screen here, because that's distracting. The total rating for all items shown on the show is used to rate the show itself, and in the future, these votes will be used to refine the machine learning model. So I have to come over here to the A/B test, and I have to say, hey, look at that. That's very funny. Today's content is actually pretty heavily weighted towards Newsstack articles, because we're the week after KubeCon, so there's just all of this stuff coming out onto the internet. Puppet almost made it on last week, but they didn't come up in the list of stuff. They were actually in one of the 15 that Trufflebot selects, but it didn't get there. So I wanted to put this up, which it's not actually about this. The 2020 State of DevOps Report and why automation and self-service are key. Whatever, that's fine. You can go and read that. Everybody knows DevOps is great. One thing I did not know, so I guess maybe this could be my today I learned, the word DevOps was actually created by one of the founders of Puppet, so now we know who to thank. One thing about this, and it was the thing that was going to come up last week, and it probably went out as one of the espresso shot tweets, is Puppet Connect. This is probably going to destroy Ansible. I started out with Puppet when they first came out. I used them all the way up to, I don't remember, Puppet version 3 or something, where then I decided it was just, I wasn't willing to have multiple sprawl of machines just to run the automation framework. So I switched to Ansible when I started doing work just by myself, because I was really happy just to be able to do things over SSH. The entire universe has changed since those days, and I'm very impressed with Puppet's reinvention of themselves, because their core product actually doesn't have a home in the cloud-native Kubernetes containerization world. What they've done here with Puppet Connect, which, well, what they've done is they've announced a product that doesn't exist. But we're going to overlook that, because what they're planning on doing and what they're trying to get interest for right now is a solution. This has nothing here. Why is there nothing here? Okay, so that link is terrible. Okay, well, what this is going to do is this is going to enable recipe reuse and self-service for people who use Puppet. So now, instead of building this whole automation infrastructure that's all tangled together and you can't share it with anyone else, you'll have slices, and there'll be a centralized database from which people can pull. I'm totally like off screen here, aren't I? From which people can pull, that's better, pieces of code and reuse them. So it'll introduce cross-team sharing, it'll eliminate silos, and it looks like it's actually going to be very, very cool. Whenever I do stuff with Ansible, and Jeff Geerling has done a lot of work to try and make Ansible roles portable, so you can do Git submodules and bring them in, but it's still pretty clunky. They're building a system that's hopefully going to get rid of the clunk. I've said enough about it. Let's vote for it, and then let's move on. Next up, look in last week's tweets, because whatever I tweeted about this last week actually had a better link that told you more about what this was. Oh, this one's interesting. Okay, this is another one that's not actually about this. I need to modify the reporting thing so I can change the links. So before you vote, I'm not actually suggesting that anybody become a sponsor of this. What I do want to bring up, though, is their project. This is an open source project called DDev that is a PHP framework for building a local PHP development system that uses Docker containers. Not a developer, don't use PHP, but I read their sponsorship request, and I liked the way that they presented their product, the way that they presented their objectives for making these things available, and for saying that, hey, we eat our own dog food, we're making this thing, if you like it and you use it, please sponsor us. If any of you are PHP developers, Perhaps this is useful. If you already use this, come tell me about it in the community site, and maybe we'll do a deeper dive into it. Or if it's terrible, let me know, and that'll be the end of that. The community didn't really like that one. That's fine. Next up. Oh, wow, we're getting like double embeds now. I'll have to fix that as well. Another article from Newstack that addresses what is actually a valid concern, that Kubernetes was supposed to liberate us and instead is enslaving us with complexity, and that complexity is growing with every single release and making it harder for new adopters to get started and understand it. It's daunting. In this report from the CNCF 2020 survey results of whatever they were surveying, complexity is actually listed as tied for the top 2 places, the number 2 being cultural changes with development. I'm not sure what that means, but those are the top concerns for enterprises who are exploring or implementing Kubernetes, above things like security, storage, lack of training, monitoring, networking, service mesh, logging, scaling, and other stuff. So complexity is a big concern, and if that doesn't sort itself out somehow, then it'll sort itself out some other way. The way that it could sort itself out is with more layers of abstraction on top of Kubernetes that hide away the functionality so that it's easier to adopt, or perhaps it'll be the death of Kubernetes, because nothing is going to last forever. In this article, they actually bring up that very thing. There's an interesting comparison between Kubernetes, Cloud Foundry, and OpenWhisk, with Cloud Foundry and OpenWhisk offering more abstraction. And let's see if I can find this article, or this the point here. Kubernetes is not the end game. So today it's the end game, but from a technology perspective, it's not the end game in terms of what we should expose to our users. He then goes on to talk about Knative, which is the project that he works on, and then they move into serverless. I'm still on the fence with serverless. I think it solves some useful problems, but I don't think it solves all of the problems that people try and shoehorn into it. But apparently it's picking up steam. More people are looking at using it for stuff. And he goes on to explain that serverless is more than just functions as a service. It's actually, they're working on serverless databases, which I don't even know what that means. And then there's some stuff. Now, he ends this with, users should push back at the cloud native community and demand less complexity, and that end users shouldn't be afraid to demand more dev and less ops. Up above, he says that I don't remember where it is, but the complaint comes from developers having to do operations. People who are new to this space don't remember that there used to be 2 classes. There used to be developers and there used to be system administrators, who are now operations. And then there was this move, thank you Puppet, to get rid of operations people, and because we're like, oh, devs, we don't need ops, they just get in the way, so we can do all of our own operations. Hence you have DevOps, which struggled for a while and now actually has some pretty interesting tooling. But now it seems like devs are complaining that they have to do ops. Be careful what you wish for, because you're going to get it, maybe. And now there's this move to peel ops away from DevOps? I don't know. I think that a lot of this is just frothing the water, trying to make noise and make it look relevant. But it is interesting that complexity is a big concern for Kubernetes. So as you are looking at Kubernetes and solutions with Kubernetes, consider who your users are going to be, and maybe stay away from the latest bright and shiny and focus on the dumb and simple. Try to make your Kubernetes clusters management interaction processes as boring as they can be. Next up. Yeah, so the double embeds are happening because, well, whatever. It's not relevant. Next up, AWS has dropped an autoscaler thingy called Carpenter. Eventually we're going to run out of words that start with C that we can swap with K. Carpenter runs in any Kubernetes resource, and actually will run anywhere that implements, any Kubernetes cluster that implements the Kubernetes scale sub-resource. They have horizontal autoscalers, metrics producers, and scalable node groups. Metrics producers being optional. Horizontal autoscalers are much like horizontal pod autoscalers, except you can autoscale anything you want. It's one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, that's smart. Metrics producers. Oh, there's a question for me. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Oh, interesting. Okay, so Mo says it's still not clear the difference between DevSecOps and DevOps. I'm going to let Steve Jaguar answer that. I know he's probably not watching right now, but Mose, why don't you post that as a question in the community site, and we'll get some people to... Oh, and SRE. Yeah. Okay, community's got your back. So back over to this. Metrics producers are optional. If you have a project that already creates metrics, then you don't necessarily need it. And so you can set this up to do scaling based on metrics, based on anything. Now, I'm not sure how this differs from something like Kata, other than the fact that it says, this is totally experimental and like you totally shouldn't use it, but we released it anyway. And the fact that it comes from AWS. It looks like they're taking a slightly different approach to things. It's probably good. There it is. Take a look. You guys liked that. Oh, yeah, this next one. Plausible analytics. They have a Helm chart now. Why do they have a Helm chart? Well, because their platform is open source and you can install it and run it yourself. What is their platform? They are a privacy-focused alternative to Google Analytics. Neat. I've used Pewik in the past, but not for a really long time. I like this. I like that it's self-hosted. I like that it's privacy-focused. And I like that they actually have a cloud-hosted version. And in their... All right, so they have reasonable pricing, based on the number of page views across all websites that you have connected to the platform. And they're completely independent, self-funded, bootstrapped, and debt-free. We're not interested in raising funds or taking investment. We choose the subscription business rather than surveillance capitalism. What a great phrase. And if you have the infrastructure and you'd like to run it yourself, which is the route that I will take, then they're like, yeah, sure, totally. You run it, support it, and there you go. So back over here, they released a Helm chart a few days ago to make it easier for you to install it. So you need Postgres, you need ClickHouse. Yay, ClickHouse. You need an SMTP outpoint. Outpoint? Did I just make up a word? And some other stuff. So there's the documentation on that. And knock yourself out. Plausible analytics. Oh, you all liked that one too. Cool. Some of you, most of you liked that one. All right, this one's a little bit weird. This actually came off of Twitter. I don't have the actual tweet for it, but I remember what it is. This is pulled out of the Python Kubernetes client, and it's one of those tweets where they linked to the source code and said, hey, this is a really cool thing. What he was actually pointing to is down here at the bottom, where if you have a Python application running inside of a container, inside of a Kubernetes cluster, there's a function you can call load in cluster config that will actually fetch the service account that the pod is using to run. And then you can use that service account to do other stuff within the cluster. If you're not running inside of a Kubernetes cluster, then it just raises an exception that you can catch and move on with your day. The person who found this was like, today I learned, and I write what little stuff I do develop in Python. So I also thought that this was super cool and worth putting on the show. Next up, simple atomic counter with DynamoDB and API gateway. DynamoDB is a NoSQL database solution, and all of those pride themselves in eventual consistency. And in fact, we have another article. I don't know if it's coming up today or if it went out as one of the Espresso Shot tweets from Friday, but there was something about the comparison between eventual consistency and not actually returning okay until the write has been replicated, and the balance between latency and performance and stuff, and how it just may not matter. Well, this dovetails on that by showing you how with DynamoDB you can actually implement an atomic counter, because you don't want to have multiple updates going in to increment a counter and then retrieve it back and have it not be consistent. So this shows how to use DynamoDB and the API gateway, just as an example for interfacing to it, blah, 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 to create an atomic value. And in this case, incrementing a counter, which you could use for an ID field or anything else within the database itself. I like topics around stuff, because it's like you implement Mongo and you're like, yeah, it's Mongo, and then you don't necessarily realize the consequences, or they're not consequences, but the other things you need to consider, the things that are gonna bite you one day, and finding stuff that's like, oh, hey, remember, and if you want to solve that problem, here's a way that you can do that, turning problems around and stuff. I very much like those. Hello again, NewStack. Kbench. Kbench is from the VMware Tanzu team, and you might expect me to start talking smack about it, but I'm not going to. Kbench is a benchmark utility for Kubernetes performance testing of your Kubernetes cluster that deploys and manipulates Kubernetes objects, and it will test your control plane and your data plane. So for the control plane, it can harvest performance metrics in a number of ways. For example, it benchmarks pod startup latencies by simultaneously launching and then timing 1,000 Nginx pods. It can benchmark storage by setting up a persistent volume and then the read-write speeds to that volume from a pod. And for the data plane, model workloads are containerized and run to collect system information. It includes some other stuff like Redis's memtier benchmark, FIO tests for I/O operations, QPerf and iPerf3, and is intentionally designed to give you a suite of tools to test not just the operational pieces of your Kubernetes cluster, but the back-end communication stuff, control plane and data plane, which are also very important. There you go, Kbench. Thank you, VMware Tanzu team. Hey, more stuff about event-driven architecture. Trigger mesh. A moment ago, we had event-driven autoscaling with Carpenter, and we've had that on with Kata as well. And the event-driven model of stuff is important. Doing things based on, well, modeling stuff based on how humans would do stuff. If you're familiar with Kanban, a pull model of not stacking the queue with stuff, but only loading the queue when the downstream processor has the ability. My hands are off screen a lot today. I don't know why. When the downstream processor has the ability to actually pull content in and then slowing things down when they're backed up. So event-driven architecture is similar to that, creating dynamic applications that inject speed and responsiveness into business processes. All of these posts are sponsored, so they're all heavily in favor of whoever sponsored them, but the data that's in them is still good. Essentially, an event-driven architecture is a replacement for message bus and gives you a better workflow for how to understand and interpret and react to things, other than just, there's something in the queue, I need to do it, work on it, or whatever. Trigger Mesh, who we've also had on the show, has a solution for this. This article explains the value of an event-driven architecture and may lead you to make decisions about how your message bus is architected inside of your Kubernetes cluster. I'm not going to turn this into a pitch for Trigger Mesh, but the article itself has some interesting tidbits around EDA. Boy, we're just chewing through content today, aren't we? Hey, okay, and so Kyverno made it up. That's good. Yay! All right. I've already said who they are and what they do, If you're not familiar with them, highly recommend you take a look at them. They are my choice for policy inside of the Kubernetes cluster because I don't have the time to learn Rego. I haven't done an apples to apples comparison between OPA and Kyverno, but I think at the end of the day, policy is policy. You just need to get it into your cluster and start using it. So moving forward, Kyverno looks like they're going to collaborate with other CNCF projects such as Cert Manager, which is also in the CNCF. I'm not sure if I knew that. Okay. And then, of course, the value of being in the CNCF is open collaboration. A lot more people can participate in it. It's a nod of acceptance from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation that this is of value to the community at large. Oh, everybody liked that. That's good. Next, do we have time for this? Well, I called it up, so we're going to have to do it anyway. Okay. We have had Litmus Chaos on the show quite a bit, not recently, but in the past. And we've had other chaos engineering tools and resources and concepts on as well. Evaluations and Chaos Mesh and Gremlin, who was also in for today but didn't show up. They'll be going out in the tweets later. Remember, anything that doesn't make it into the A/B test still goes out as an espresso shot in the tweets when, I guess, these go out tomorrow. Anyway, Litmus partnered with Kepton for implementing chaos engineering. Hang on. So Kepton is an open source, enterprise-grade, cloud-native application lifecycle orchestration tool. Yes, sir, son, that's right. Can you say that 5 times fast? Okay. Kepton is an orchestration tool. It orchestrates continuous delivery and operations of your applications, and it was built to help create an autonomous cloud, which essentially means enabling your organization to become more autonomous when deploying and operating your apps and services. All right. So a major use is defining a pipeline with one or more stages, and then a sequence typically starts with deploying an application. And what they've done by partnering is enabled chaos testing within the CI component of an application. So instead of deploying it out to a cluster and then smacking the heck out of the cluster, you can actually deploy controlled portions of it or deploy it into a cluster specifically for chaos engineering and then smack the heck out of it. And then use the responses from that as part of the CI workflow to decide if things should progress to the next step. This is like shift left, but for chaos engineering, which is great. So they now have, they being Litmus Chaos, now has a Litmus service that you can use to inject chaos into any stage of a Kepton pipeline. And that is all for the A/B test. So let's wrap that up, giving us an average rating of 4 coffees for today's show. And that takes us now to you know what? Today's tool of the day, Illuminatio. Sounds like a Harry Potter spell. Illuminatio! Because that's how you have to do it. Do I have a wand? No, I'll use my Illuminatio. There we go. It's my Apple Pencil. Illuminatio validates Kubernetes network policies. Woohoo! Code coverage 39%. That's okay. We'll overlook that part. Basically, you just point this at your Kubernetes cluster, and it... Hang on. Where's the explanation? It will scan your Kubernetes cluster for network policies, build test cases according to the policies, and then execute them to determine if the policies are actually working. What? Genius! And it's got a pretty elaborate README here. You got a little Giphy showing you, what's going on there. Show you how to install it. It's kubectl plugin, so you can install that with Crew, maybe, hopefully. And then shows you how to get busy working with it. So, I mean, there's really not much to say here. Tool of the day, network policy, super important. Testing network policy, probably also super important because, it's kind of terrible when you think you're all protected and somebody just walks through the front door and steals your TV. You don't run a TV in your Kubernetes cluster? Get with this program. Okay, so yeah, there we go. Illuminaudio, today's tool of the day. And with that, we have to go. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Links to everything that I talk about on the show go up in the free community site at community.cncn.io after the show ends, or in some cases, like it was on Friday, 3 days later, because I posted it last night, 2 days later. Sorry. Anyway, community members usually get early access to the links, the video replay, and other exclusive content. It's free to join. It's growing every single day, so, come hang out. If you have something you'd like for me to consider for the show, post it in the community site if you're there, and just mention me. That way it shares with everybody. If you're not there, whatever. If you don't want to join, that's fine. You can also just ping me on Discord or Twitter or anywhere else. Have a great day, everyone. Keep learning. I will see you in the next show. Stay caffeinated.